Okay, so this is the Bible study for Genesis chapter 16. And the text says, Now Sarai, Abram's wife, had borne him no children, but she had an Egyptian slave named Hagar. So she said to Abram, The Lord has kept me from having children. Go sleep with my slave. Perhaps I can build a family through her. Abram agreed to what Sarai said. So after Abram had been living in Canaan 10 years, Sarai his wife took her Egyptian slave Hagar and gave her to her husband to be his wife. He slept with Hagar and she conceived. When she knew she was pregnant, she began to despise her mistress. Then Sarai said to Abraham, You are responsible for the wrong I am suffering. I put my slave in your arms, and now that she knows she is pregnant, she despises me. May the Lord judge between you and me. Your slave is in your hands, Abram said. Do with her whatever you think best. Then Sarai mistreated Hagar, so she fled from her. The angel of the Lord found Hagar near a spring in the desert. It was the spring that is beside the road to Shur. And he said to Hagar, slave of Sarai, and he said, Hagar, slave of Sarai, where have you come from, and where are you going? I am running away from my mistress Sarai, she answered. Then the angel of the Lord told her, Go back to your mistress and submit to her. The angel added, I will increase your descendants so much that they will be too numerous to count. The angel of the Lord said to her, You are now pregnant, and you will give birth to a son. You shall name him Ishmael, for the Lord has heard of your misery. He will be a wild donkey of a man. His hand will be against everyone, and everyone's hand against him, and he will live in hostility toward all his brothers. She gave this name to the Lord. She gave this name to the Lord who spoke to her. You are the God who sees me. For she said, I have now seen the one who sees me. That is why the well is also called Bir Lahai Roy. It is still there between Kadesh and Bered. So Hagar bore Abram a son, and Abram gave the name Ishmael to the son she had born. Abram was 86 years old when Hagar bore him Ishmael. All right, so this is sort of a turning point or a really important moment in the story of Abram. Not really his shining moment or a great day, but it definitely is an important part of the story. Number one says, What happened in last week's Bible study? A, the word of the Lord came to Abram in a vision. That seems so long ago now that we read this text, doesn't it? B, God promised to be Abram's shield. So God was going to be there for him. C, Abram asked for a child, and God promised him descendants as many as the stars in the sky. D, Abram believed the Lord, and it was credited to him as righteousness. Again, that feels like a long time ago with what we read today. E, Abram asked how he would know that this was going to come true, and God told him what would happen in the next 400 or so years. So, really important to remember all that because it really feels like, um, it was last chapter for us. It was last week when we studied it, but it really feels like he had forgotten, like it had been a long time for him, and he just didn't seem to be behaving as if he remembered all of that. Um, First, because God promised it. Um, you know, Second, because God told him that this is going to be years that all this happens, and this is not. I got it under control, but it's not going to happen as fast as you think. So that should have sort of set the stage a little bit. Um, God said he was going to be faithful to him. Abram believed him. but something else is going on here. So number 2 says, what do we learn in 16:1 and 2? A, Sarai, Abram's wife, had borne him no children. So a couple things. We read that he has now been in Canaan for 10 years. Um, so it doesn't really tell us, I don't think, in verse 15 how long he had been there. I think kind of the assumption is that all of this, um, maybe there was some time. I mean, obviously, 10 years has passed since he uh, went there, and Lot went to down near Sodom. But we don't really know how long. I don't think that it had been before Abram had to go rescue Lot. So, I mean, maybe it was yesterday, maybe it was a few years. Doesn't really tell us. Um, but I don't know that any of that justifies him seeming to have completely forgotten God's promise of faithfulness. But here we are. B, Sarai said to Abram, the Lord has kept me from having children. Go sleep with my slave. Perhaps I can build a family through her. So Sarai attributes her lack of children to God, that God, the God who promised that you would have, descendants, um, has not followed through. He's kept me from having children, so maybe he meant you would have descendants through somebody else. I mean, maybe there was some reasoning and justification there. See, Abram agreed to what Sarai said. Just in case you thought it was all Sarai, Abram agreed and said, "Yeah, sure. Sleep with your slave. That sounds good." Um, So he went along with that. Number 3 says, what happened to Abram believing God? A, yeah, that part is gone. Or B, well, he probably still believed God, but maybe this was what God meant. And I put this in here because I think this is the thought process we go through too, and it may sometimes lead to our what appears to be sort of outright acts of disobedience and unbelief. Um, we look at Abram and sort of judge, and I've already done that as we were talking here, judge that he has just stopped believing in God, apparently, stopped trusting him. He did his own thing. But is it possible that he had justified all of this? Like, wait, maybe this is what God meant. Yeah, God said he was going to give me descendants as many as the stars of the sky, but maybe he meant through Hagar. And so I think a lot of times our justification is that no, I didn't stop believing him. I just thought that obviously it can't happen through my really old wife now, but maybe this youngster, her slave, can give me a daughter or a son, I mean. So I think we do the same thing sometimes and end up in disobedience nonetheless, in lack of trust in God nonetheless, because we reason it out. Because it makes sense to us that maybe this is God, how God was going to provide for us, and we think we're sort of helping Him along, and that's a dangerous place to be. Number 4 says, how long after Abram's conversion or conversation with God did this happen? Um, you know, I don't think we really know. I already kind of said this, that it tells us uh, in verse 3, Abram had been living in Canaan 10 years. As we sort of go back and look, um, I'm just going back. There's a lot of after this in our descriptions of time in a lot of these stories. Um, so I just we have at the time when Amraphel was king of Shinar and Arioch, that's in chapter 14. I really don't know that it gives us a timeline here. Um, but I think we can say confidently less than 10 years. He's been in Canaan. He was in Canaan when he rescued Lot. Um, so we can't say that it was 10 years, I don't think, or 5 years necessarily, but it was less than 10 years. So this wasn't 100 years later. Um, so when we think of, well, his wife was old now, it tells us, I don't know how old his wife was. I don't think. But it does tell us that Abram was 86 in verse 16. Um, so, if his wife was the same age, then honestly, once you're in your 70s and 80s, does 10 years really matter in terms of bearing a child? I mean, in modern medical science, it is really rare for, I think, somebody to bear a child after their 50s. I think that's maybe even 40s. I think um, that they worry about um, trouble with pregnancies and things, even when you're in your 30s nowadays. But all of that is just the percentages. But I mean, women go through menopause, and at that point, they can't bear children, and that's usually much younger than 70s and 80s in our modern times. So, I just say all that to say, not sure that, not sure how much that 10 years mattered, or that 10 years before it may have just been just as unlikely as it was at this point. Um, so, um, so number 5 says, um, what do we learn in verse 4 happened once Hagar was pregnant? So it tells us in verse 4 that when she knew she was pregnant, she began to despise her mistress. So, a couple things. One, yeah, this is not surprising, not at all surprising. Um, that um, anybody who's lived for any length of time, um, I think the drama of the teen years in middle school and high school hopefully is behind me. When he dated her and she dated him and they dated each other, and then one was mad at the other, and um, I dated a girl in college who had already dated one of my friends, and when I found out how he had treated her, I was angry at him. He wasn't really as good a friend as he had been before. And all of that's pretty normal, I think, in our adolescence. But um, I'm married 20 years now, not fighting over women or men anymore. Done with all that. But I do know some people that, whether it's from affairs or divorce or whatever situations, that they are dealing with similar drama because of all of this. And, you know, people that were never even married but have multiple baby mamas. Um, Yeah, we've seen that, right? So it's not really surprising at all that okay, I I had the Abram has a wife. He is with permission given the chance to sleep with her slave, who is presumably much younger, and she gets pregnant, and once she does, the hormones are swirling and raging, and she now um, Now there's jealousy, and well, she's going to be the mother of the child, but is this child going to become Sarah's child now, and the slave be sort of put out, and lots of questions about where my place is in this, and what place I should have versus what I'm going to have. And I don't think any of this is surprising at all that we would have some drama here. And so, honestly, um, we have some crazy stuff going on as accepted in our society, and people have open relationships these days, and people are swingers or whatever. And I'm not really the expert on any of this, but when I hear it, I think mostly on TV shows or movies that I hear about these things, and I think that would never work. That No, that would never work. That is it. I don't care how much somebody says they're going to be okay with it. At some point, they're not going to be okay with it. Most of the TV shows I watch, it ends up in murder. So that seems to me also to be the predictable outcome of such a thing. So anyway, um, we think we can we're arrogant. We think we can handle things that we weren't built to be able to handle. We're not supposed to be able to handle that. We're supposed to, well, go back and watch my marriage and relationships, love and marriage series that we just finished in the preaching sessions. So you can watch those on not this YouTube channel, but actually there's another YouTube channel for the Sandia sermons. And so there you go. Number 7, how did they resolve this according to verse 6? I don't know if resolve is the right answer, but a right word, but um, you know, Hagar or Sarai blames the whole thing on Abram. Says, "See what you've done to me," and this was her idea. Um, And so Abram says, "Look, do whatever you want." And so he lets her do what she wants, which is to mistreat the slave Hagar. And so then ultimately Hagar ran away because she was being mistreated. This did not make the situation better, it made it worse. And all of this, honestly, to me, in this Bible study, all of this is building to number 8 here, which is maybe the most powerful piece of all of the most of this Bible study and most of this text is dumbfounding to me, confusing, uh, um, but God's grace in this text is I really believe found in number 8. It says, "What did the angel of the Lord say to Hagar?" Um, so A, where did you come from? Where did you go? Or something like that. That's a little gift for you '90s children. Um, he did say something like that in verse 8, Hagar, slave of Sarai, where have you come from and where are you going? Which is a little different, but similar. B, go back to your mistress and submit to her. He did say that, which seems maybe not like the grace of God that we wish He would give to us. Like, I'm with you. I'm glad you left. I'm going to take care of you out in the desert. That's what we'd love to hear. But no, go back to your mistress and submit to her. See, I will increase your descendants so much that they will be too numerous to count. In other words, I'm going to bless you and multiply your descendants. And this is not going to go as badly as it feels like it's going right now. D, you shall name your son Ishmael, for the Lord has heard of your misery. So that's wonderful to hear. And then E, your son will be Well, we all know guys like that. His hand will be against everyone, and everyone's hand against him. He will be a donkey of a man, is what it says. Um, and that doesn't feel like a blessing. Um, although, let me just say that, and I've said this to folks in our ministry, um, many times when we're born into difficult circumstances, and Ishmael for sure was, we learn survival skills. And for him to be a donkey of a man, that may have been survival skills. Now, I have told people that the thing that kept you alive in your past is what's standing in the way of you being successful in your future. I've said that because I feel like people have learned not to trust anybody, to do things on their own, to be, um, you know, mistrusting of everybody around them, um, and that maybe kept them alive if they were in prison or in juvie or whatever. But at some point, it becomes the thing that's holding them back from being successful because anybody who's been successful in life has had help from God, first of all, and from people. And none of us can be, I don't think it's possible. Those of us who think we've pulled ourselves up by our own bootstraps have probably had support and help along the way that we're not recognizing as much as we should. And so there are assets that can help lift us out of our situation if we will take advantage of them, but that doesn't happen when we don't trust anybody around us. So that's who Ishmael is to become. Uh, but even more significant in verse 9, or in number 9, question 9. What did Hagar call the Lord after this conversation? So, regardless of what he said to her, she gave this name to the Lord who spoke to her. Verse 13. You are the God who sees me. For she said, I have now seen the one who sees me. And I've been meditating on this as we've been studying Genesis. And we talked about this in the last Bible study, and that is that um, it seems like their understanding of God is developing, particularly Abram's understanding of God. You know, he knew that God spoke to him, he knew that God called him. But in a world of all sorts of gods and pagan religions, um, did he? So we have this sense from a Judeo-Christian perspective of who God is, and I've heard of people sort of ignorantly saying Allah is not God, God is God. Well, Allah means God. So I understand what people are trying to say in terms of, the things that Muslims perhaps believe about God are not the things that we believe about God. Peace. I agree. Um, but honestly, saying Allah is not God, God is God, um, is much like saying the God of the Hebrews is not God, only the God of the Christians. And honestly, I think it's more accurate. I think it's better for us to think of throughout history there has been a sense, and we can go to Romans and read that the invisible qualities of God are visible even in nature, so that man is without excuse. The people of God, the the people of the earth throughout history have recognized the presence of God, and we've not known how to define him or how to explain him. And so many of the pagan religions. We find things in pagan religions that mirror things in Christianity and are confused by that. But I would say one of the early church fathers said, all truth is God's truth. So if we look at our world and see something that we know to be true, it's true. It's God. God created it. God made it, and it's true. So if somebody saw it and maybe interpreted it wrong or whatever and created a religion that is not entirely accurate, um, it doesn't change the fact that they saw something about God when they were creating it, and therefore we might see God's presence, or truths about God at least within those um, within those religions. Now, all roads do not lead to God. That's not what I'm saying. I think of Paul in Athens when he said, walked around and was troubled by what he saw. And what he said, though, was, I see that in every way you are a very religious people. I even saw an altar that was created to an unknown God. Let me proclaim to you the God that you already worship as unknown. So they knew something. I don't know what it was about this altar that made Paul feel like this God that they don't know is the God that I worship. And maybe he didn't think that at all. Maybe he just realized that they knew there were gods out there that they didn't know or understand. And he was presenting to them one that they did not understand. I say all this to say that Abram's coming out of a world of pagan religion, of all sorts of people know that there is a God, but they don't know God. And so they've created religions and ways to worship that are not necessarily worshiping God, because they're not worshiping God in his truth. They're worshiping God in a way that they have sort of created God to be or interpreted God to be, and it wasn't truly God. So that's what we believe about Christianity, is that these other gods are, they may have elements of truth in them, but they are not truly God, and they are not truly gods. Um, so Abram didn't have the New Testament. He didn't even have the Old Testament. He had an understanding of the existence of God from what he saw in nature and from what the people around him had presented. And then he had a voice that spoke to him. So now he understands that there is a God because God is speaking to him. But what does he know about God? So then we have this encounter with Melchizedek that Abram had, um, who we're told is priest of Most High God, and in his blessing spoke of creator of heaven and earth. So then we think, well, Melchizedek has perhaps some understanding of God Most High, of Lord God, of God Creator, that Abram did not yet have, because in the next text we find Abram conversing with this God in a very different way than we've seen previously, or at least it hadn't been recorded. So who else knows this God? Now we got Hagar having an encounter with the one who sees me. I have seen the one who sees me. And we're told from our scripture that this is God. She had an encounter with the true God. And how she described him as the one who sees her. So um, maybe we didn't need to go on that winding path, but I've been meditating on this a lot, because I think from a Judeo-Christian perspective, modern Christianity, particularly fundamentalist Christianity, we assume that essentially people have known the entirety of who God is that we know in Scripture, which I would argue we don't know the entirety of who God is, but we know all of this that we have recorded in Scripture, and we assume that Abram knew that too. And we never consider how did he come? How did we get all this knowledge of God? How did we come to know this much about God? We came to know it because people had encounters with him and began to describe this living God, this true God, as distinct from other gods of our own creation, um, from the things that we saw about God, but we sort of elaborated them and created these gods that were not um, entirely truly God. Um, may have had some bit of truth. So I say all that to say there is only one God. And anybody that has created a religion that had a God or gods has been trying to explain that one God. Perhaps failing to understand, perhaps likely not having true relationship, which is where Abram differs, which is where sort of this line of Judeo-Christian religion has differed. Um, and I would argue has gone off track to create gods of our own making also at many times. But we have this guide of the history of people that have really interacted with God to sort of correct our path. So, anyway, um, Hagar, apparently up to now, has been in the household of Abram who talks to God, but she has not known God until she was broken and afraid and hurt and out on her own, and God went out to her. So he doesn't just call Abram the leader of the tribe, the family, the rich person, but he calls the slave too. He speaks with the slave too. And to me, when I read this, that's the powerful point. That's the powerful moment when Hagar the slave recognizes that God sees her, that God doesn't just talk to Abram, God talks to her as well. And he sees what she's going through and hasn't lost her, hasn't given up on her. Calls her back to submit to her mistress. And the last part of this question, number 9, says, is this the God you know? And it is the God I know, the God who sees me, the God who sees not just me, not just the pastor, not just the president, but the God who sees the broken, the God who sees the one who has been hurt, the one who is victimized unfairly. Um, did Hagar ask for any of this? This wasn't her fault. This was Sarai's idea, and Sarai's the one that's now mistreating her. Um, but God sees her. God knows what she's going through, and that's a powerful thing to know about God Most High, about our God, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, the God who is from the beginning. I am. Um, this is the powerful thing to know: is that He sees. He sees you if you're hurting, if you're broken, if you're victimized. He sees you.